Okay. Yep. Everything's all systems go. All systems go, Rocket Man. Okay. So this is Erhart's poem, A Relative Thing, which is on the course pack, pages 9 and 10. 9 and 10. Yep. And it's a little long, sort of. Erhart is a very smart guy, and he's still, as some of the veterans are, enraged. The rage sort of never really goes away. Let me just get a new color balance here. Okay. Oh yeah, it looks so much better. I can hardly wait for my moment, my moment in the sun. I forgot. This is it. So this poem is gonna read like a serious rebuke to the public, and that's the way a lot of Erhart's books are. Probably the most readable and immediate is his war memoir called Vietnam Perkasie. Perkasie is a town in Illinois, I think, and so it's basically what happens when a 17-year-old, 18-year-old goes from Illinois to Vietnam and back. And when he's a true believer, he starts off as a true believer, and he does not end up as a true believer. So there's a lot of this fuels. With some of the poems, you can see that there's a narrator and there's a construction of a literary quality. In some poems, not so much. It looks as though the narrator is the author, and it's hard to separate these two things. And I think we tend to think, because poetry is so personal, like pop songs, they can be very personal, and we think, that must be about the person's own relationships. Like, no, I didn't assume that. I would never assume that about any work of art. It's not. Just trying to get a bit more light going on here without blinding myself. There's a lot of blinding. There's a lot of blinding going on here. Okay, it's like a Greek play. Okay. So you're going to hear in this rebuke almost a religious sort of patterning of this rhythm of a return to this particular phrase, "We are the ones you sent." Right? So we are the ones. A relative thing. We are the ones you sent to fight a war you didn't know a thing about. It didn't take us long to realize the only land we controlled was covered by the bottoms of our boots. When the newsman said naval ships had shelled a VC staging point, we saw a breastless woman and her stillborn child. We laughed at old men stumbling in the dust in frenzied terror to avoid our 3-ton trucks. We fought outnumbered in Way City, while the Arvin soldiers looted bodies in the safety of the rear. The cookies from the wives of Local 104 did not soften our awareness. We have seen the pacified supporters of the Saigon government sitting in their jam-packed cardboard towns, their wasted hands placed limply in their laps, their empty bellies waiting for the rice some district chief has sold for profit to the Viet Cong. We have been democracy on Zippo raids, burning houses to the ground, driving eager Amtraks through new-sown fields. We are the ones who have to live with the memory that we were the instruments of your pigeon-breasted fantasies. We are inextricable accomplices in this travesty of dreams, but we are not alone. We are the ones you sent to fight a war you did not know a thing about. Those of us that lived have tried to tell you what went wrong. Now you think you do not have to listen. Just because we will not fit into the uniforms of photographs of you at 21 does not mean you can disown us. We are your sons, America, and you cannot change that. When you awake, we will still be here. Okay, so it's a very fine, poem, and you can see what a difference there is between, say, the sort of sardonic, brutal qualities of say Haldeman and Ritterbusch and R.L. Barth, and this kind of naked rage, which is barely covered over, right? But I mean, Erhart is gonna get the stuff in. He's gonna tell. It's a very narrative poem. It's telling a story, but it's also dictating. It's a lecture. Basically, it's a lecture to Americans who are not paying attention. This would now have been in the mid '80s. I'm trying to remember when Erhart wrote these poems. Before the first Gulf War, which caused a lot of grief for the Vietnam veterans because they just saw it as a repeat of what had happened before. Anyway, so let me go back to this. So we are the ones you sent to fight the war you didn't know a thing about. And this is the issue, right? Is that, remember that in, say, the mid-'60s, now, Erhart goes in 67, as I recall, which is the war is just getting hotter and hotter, and it isn't going to really peak until sort of around 1970. So anybody caught up in the war between 66 and 70 is likely to see the worst of the worst. But Americans didn't necessarily know much about the war, right? Because they didn't care to know. This was the thing. People saw it on the television. They were like, "This looks horrible. We don't want to know any more about it. Please don't tell us about it. We don't want to know." And there's a great deal of denial that goes on, and I'm sure you've seen that as we proceed through this COVID thing, where people are just like, I don't like this reality, so I refuse to accept it. It's like, okay, that's not going to work very well. So it didn't take us long to realize. So remember that the fight is for, the Americans believe, is for the control of land, because this is how previous wars have gone. Control the land, control the people, control the world, and so on. But the only land they control is what's underneath their boots, which is going to shift, right? It's going to change from day to day. This should connect to O'Brien, which we have not yet. We just did. That's right. We just did O'Brien. Yeah. And then there's this juxtaposition of, like, there's this and there's that. So, when the newsman said naval ships had shelled a VC staging point, it's like, that's one side of the story. But what they saw was a corpse and a dead child. And this issue of naked women and nudity in war is a very common one in these poems, because it's considered to be the utmost obscenity, where it's just like the worst. And Casey talks about this, right, where he sees the corpse with an erection, and he's just horrified. He's just horrified by it. It's not that the person's dead. It's like, oh, yeah, they're dead, but it's like, oh my God, sort of this final terrible indignity, this absolute loss of privacy, of any, it's a real obscenity, right? A stillborn child. Okay, so, it's like, what happened there? I mean, was she in the middle of a child? Like, did the bombing cause the child to be born partially, or what happened? Is she holding a dead child? And then we laughed at old men something. So basically, there's this, these 3-ton trucks that come rumbling through a town, or through a village, and the soldiers are just like, screw it, we don't care what happens to the people. So that's their reality. Then we fought outnumbered in Hue City. This would have been during Tet 1968, when Hue was under attack. Meanwhile, the South Vietnamese, right, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the ARVN, soldiers are looting bodies. So they're not fighting, right? They're getting the spoils of war. So this does not make you love your allies. And you start to think, well, why are we fighting for them? Because the Americans are supposedly fighting to prop up South Vietnam, right? We fought outnumbered. Okay. But meanwhile, and then they get a delivery. This is one of the bizarre things about the battlefield in the 60s and 70s, was that the post might be very effective. Actually, the post was very effective in World War I, very effective. I mean, it was crucial to sort of maintaining morale. And in World War II, where mail was incredibly important. But they get a box, where they will have presumably gotten a package of a box from Local 104 of some kind of, union. which will have, did not soften our awareness. So their situational awareness is the military's concern. It's like you don't want to, you don't want to lose your edge. So here come the cookies. So they stop on the battlefield, and they're like, oh look, cookies, and they break open the thing. Everybody takes a cookie, and then back to the war. So it did not soften their situational awareness. We have seen the pacified supporters of the Saigon government. It's like, okay, so the Saigon government is in the south, right? And they are essentially now excess people. They're just hoping to survive somehow, and so they're jammed into these shanties, these shantyvilles, basically, and they're waiting for a rice ration to survive, and they're starving to death because the district chief sold the rice for a profit and is keeping it himself. And so again, the corruption, and there's corruption. So the South Vietnamese government is known for its corruption. It's very, very hard. You have to have money if you're going to survive. And the people who got on helicopters and got out of Vietnam were usually the wealthy, almost invariably. Yeah. Okay. We have been democracy, capital D, democracy on Zippo rate. So like this is, again, it's like this is the policy, really, this is how we're bringing democracy is, we're burning down people's homes deliberately, like, one home at a time, burning houses to the ground, driving eager Amtraks. Now we saw this in Casey's A Bummer, right, where this is the same kind of thing, where the Amtraks, in this case, are the M113A's amphibious tracks, basically, which are going through the News Home Field. So it's the same discussion. So like that's democracy. How many people did you recruit today for the cause of democracy by flattening their village or flattening their fields? We are the ones who have to live with the memory that we were the instruments of your pigeon-breasted fantasies. This concept of the pigeon-breasted fantasies is a very literary reference, where basically you have pigeon-breasted is like this sort of like puffed up. You imagine yourself sort of all dressed in like a tuxedo, because a pigeon sort of looks dressed up, right? And my memory is that this is, I'm pretty sure it's Shakespeare. I'm gonna say that it's Hamlet. I'm probably gonna get this wrong. I should have looked this up before. Yeah, and of course everybody refers to 1902. Yeah, it's this sort of, these incredible sort of, how the pigeon appears to have this sort of stuffed shirt, this beautiful stuffed shirt, and that's the kind of thing you've got going here. So it's almost like Aristophanes. It's almost sort of this. It's this very, very high sort of high cultural reference to the notion that the vain, societal, the high society, the elites, get dressed up in a tux and black tie only, and wear white gloves and so on, have these fantasies about making the world better, a better place, and but send the poor to do it. We're inextricably accomplices, but we are not alone. It's like, okay, so yeah, they're the trigger pullers, and they have to live with that. But everybody else has to live with the rest, and they won't, right? They refuse it. That's the point. That's why he's writing this poem. We are the ones you sent to fight a war you did not know a thing about. And those of us that have lived, so here's the sort of like the brutal part of it. It's like, not everybody made it. In fact, lots and lots didn't, especially. So I tried to tell you what went wrong. Now you think you do not have to listen. And this is always the way, where people will say to a veteran, don't bother me with your hard luck story about how you fought for America, and I don't want to know about it. And this has been replaced, interestingly enough, with this sort of knee-jerk thank you for your service crap that started in 2002, basically, when people started coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, where no matter, if you look vaguely military, people would say thank you for your service. You're like, whoa, first of all, I didn't serve. Second of all, I wouldn't serve. And so on. But there's this attempt to sort of like thank people and get that out of the way so that you don't have to hear their troubles. Really, what you don't want to have to do is listen to the veterans, because the veterans are not going to tell you things you want to hear. They're going to tell you unpleasant truths that are going to be ugly, and that's what you don't want to hear. So just because we will not fit into the uniforms of photographs, so basically, what do you look like? What do you look like when you're, say, 50, 60, as opposed to what you look like when you're 18 or 19, and you were in Vietnam. But that doesn't mean you can disown us, right? Just because we're not the same as we were in our photographs, or you either, for that matter. We're your sons, America. You cannot change that. And so there's this notion that, maybe we can just get away from this, from paying this particular bill. And America, and I think like many countries, is extremely good at this. Canada is too. It's not as though we treat veterans well. And if you send people to fight a war, I think you need to be more. I think you are immediately morally responsible, not just for the people you kill and whether or not it's a just cause, which you are responsible for, but you are also responsible for the people who you sent to do the job, who are usually the people who don't have the money or the education or the chances that you or your families have. As Oedipus says at one point in Oedipus Tyrannus, it is what I would have you think on. Okay.